Belief in God, Satan, angels, heaven, and hell at a 23-year low. This is a story that we found on thebaptistpress.com by Diana Chandler, and it was written on July 31st, 2023. So Gallup, this polling organization Gallup, asked Americans whether or not they believed in God, angels, heaven, hell, and the devil. And they could answer that they believed in it, that they don't believe in it, or that they're not sure somehow. But in general, they found that the belief in these entities was at a, quote, 23-year low. And there was about a 10 to 15% drop in each of those, in belief in each of those entities. They also found that there was a positive correlation between belief and age, meaning that as your age increased, your belief went up. And they also found negative correlations between belief and education level. So as your education level goes up, your belief goes down. And a negative relation between belief and household income level. Ben, what's your take on this?
Yeah, I mean, all the stats line up kind of with what I would hypothesize. But it is going in a good direction, and I'm excited to see that, although we still have a long ways to go, because as people are, heading more towards disbelief in deities, we still have people that believe in other supernatural entities. And so while we're getting some more non-religious people or just non-theist, I don't even want to say they're in the camp of atheist yet, because many of them are still in that not really sure what they believe phase. But many of them are still not skeptics. And they'll still accept other supernatural ideas, but so we have a ways to go there, and people aren't necessarily evaluating their truth methods yet. So I think it's a step in the right direction. But I think even as this number kind of goes down, I'd still would like to see some more impact happening on like people involved in like anti-vax ideas, people having issues with scientific illiteracy, natural medicine charlatans, chiropractors, and other problematic people are just going to jump right on that. Like once this one thing kind of becomes a minority, we're just going to get other people kind of taking the place of that. So I think unless we kind of shift how people problem solve, this is still going to be kind of the same issue, just new topics. And I guess that's why the ACA exists at all, is to try to help people get into that mindset. But it was interesting for me with this particular article, the idea that even though, I guess the weird thing for me was that a large amount of churchgoers no longer believe in Satan or hell, which is kind of odd. Like they still believe in God, but they don't believe in Satan or hell, which if they're claiming to be Christian or some variety of Christian, that kind of throws a wrench in their theology. Because, I mean, as I understand it, the entire Bible's premise is that they were tempted in the garden by Satan, and that the whole reason to believe in Jesus is because of the threat of hell. So
you're taking it all out of context, Ben.
Yeah. Well, like I feel like now we're getting some weird justification. Like maybe people are shifting more to an orthodox view of hell, in that it's a separation from God, but like in the sense that like you're spiritually separated from God, but you're all still in heaven, but it's just torture for you because no, I don't know if you've heard of it. Like I've had Orthodox Christians explain to me their view on hell. Like many of them don't believe in a physical hell. It's like everyone's in the presence of God, but if you don't want to be in the presence of God, then it's torture for you for eternity, because you're basically in the presence of something you don't want to be in the presence of. So it's like, yeah, so it's maybe people are going more in that direction, but I just see that being the biggest inconsistency with this whole thing. And I kind of need some more answers on that. And I wonder if Helen has some answers. What do you think?
I have answers. I don't know if they're correct, but I have answers. So after all the bullshit we've just been talking about to the previous episodes, if you want watch the previous episodes, if you want to know what we talked about earlier that made us all angry, but this gave me like a little ray of hope, some sunshine in my life. And because I do want to see people kind of get away from supernatural beliefs. And yes, I went on the religious to spiritual journey on my way to being an atheist. I took a stop along there for 13 years. And basically, the more education I got, I went to school for psychology, and I was like, holy crap, we fool ourselves all the time. And that was a really, really good thing to learn. And I'm glad to see people that they're questioning if there's deities, if organized religion even has a role in a modern society. And I'm glad that, we are here because we're trying to push it back against, bad ideas. Because if religion was benign, the ACA and, the work I do with recovering from religion, though we as organizations would not exist. And I think it's a good thing that we exist, but I'm hoping, maybe future generations, won't need these organizations anymore. And I want to really point out that we do have to work on skeptical. Because you leave religion doesn't mean you leave bad ideas. And we need to be able to kind of break things down and teach people to be more skeptical. So, that's my first little bits of opinions that are going around in my big brain. So, Phoebe, you have been waiting patiently to give your opinion, and I would like to hear it.
I'm always a patient person. I'm nice and patient. I'm calm. I'm rational. I speak in a tone. But whilst people have been talking about the article, and yes, it is baby steps in the right direction, I had a real problem with the article itself. And that is that the article made the equivalency that a lot of articles seem to do, and it tried to equate poor people as stupid. And that argumentation is seen over and over and over and over, and it is very damaging because it diminishes the quality of the argumentation. Yes, the article goes on to say median household income, the lower the median household income, the more likely you are to believe in this. But that is not necessarily something which can therefore be extrapolated out, because it only looks at that one very narrow thing that is those very poor communities, particularly within some parts of the United States. You have to understand that there is a lack of opportunity in these areas. So therefore, this spiral leads to a lack of educational opportunities, a lack of wider exposure to things. And in a lot of poor communities, particularly poor non-white communities, they are built around religious centers that are very free to enter, in both the sense of liberté and gratuity, kind of free. They are both there for a very long and established time as part of the community. And the culture is usually one that the community is built around these church communities, particularly in places such as New England, because that's where the first settlers went to establish their own religion freedom from, well, George III, as he was. And it is very irritating to see that median household income is used as a benchmark for people believing in certain things, when it is a lot more nuanced than that. I know personally some, excuse my language here, dirt poor atheists who don't believe a single word of this. And I have met some millionaire religious people. And it really irritates me when articles seem to equate your household income with your likelihood of being skeptical, being a believer in certain things, voting in a certain way. And what it does, and I'm guilty of this too, is it makes me stereotype these groups as being, well, bigoted groups, which is wrong, because it means that I will bleed that bigotry over into other things associated with what are poor communities, which are usually ethnic minority communities, or communities where there is a high level of deprivation. And the article going down this path makes it so that its own arguments are diminished by having median household income as one of the hooks, so to speak. I couldn't quite get the word there, to get its teeth into. So, Scott, what are you getting your teeth into?
You know, I think you make a great point there, Phoebe. It's very easy for us when we see a story like this, and really it wasn't much of a story. I mean, the story was basically just handpicked a few of the points that was done out of the Gallup poll, and so they didn't really give much background or context, to use that word. But I think you make a good point. There is research showing, I mean, that investigates why is there a relationship between belief and income level? Why is there a relationship between belief and education level? And it's not because believers are stupid, although that is admittedly a very easy conclusion to come to when you see something like this. For example, we know that individuals that feel like they have less control over their lives, like would be the case if they were a lower income or if they were a lower education level, if they feel like there's too much out of their control, very often they can use religion as a way to bolster that particular aspect of their personality. So I think that there's a responsibility in reporting that needs to, I mean, they need to at least comment on that kind of thing. They didn't say specifically believers are dumb, but they didn't specifically say that's not the case. Okay. And so I think like I said, there's some responsibility there to at least put some of the context in. But as far as the results of this survey, it's a feel-good story, right? It's a feel-good story. And it gives me a little bit of fatherly pride when I look at our country and it looks like we're growing up, right? It reminds me of my favorite Bible verse, and I do have a favorite Bible verse. It's out of 1 Corinthians, or as a prominent member of society said, 1 Corinthians 13:11. This verse says, "When I was a child, I spoke as a child, I understood as a child, I thought as a child, but when I became a man, I put away childish things." And so when I see a story like this, to me, we're starting to put away childish things. The survey itself, I thought, was very focused, which can be a good thing. It helps the respondents to stay focused on the information that's of critical importance here. But I wanted to find out a little bit more about what's going on here. So I found another survey. This one was the General Social Survey 2022 done by the University of Chicago. And many scholars consider this to be the quote unquote gold standard of surveys relating to faith. This survey was described at thehill.com, and here's a quote: "To some extent, declining faith is a generational trend. The share of Americans who claim no religion rises progressively younger age groups. But the rise in non-religious Americans is too steep to be fully explained in terms of generational replacement," meaning the differences are more than just the believers dying off and the younger people coming in. And this I thought was the most interesting little tidbit here. "Scholars suspect many Americans are simply becoming more open about rejecting religion, an admission once clouded in stigma." So let's think about that for a second. That's us. Okay. That's what we're doing here. That's what we're doing on the nonprofits. We're helping to eliminate the stigma that was once attached, and still largely is, that was attached to being a non-believer. It's becoming safer to say that you don't believe in these things. And I think that's an effect that we as individuals on the nonprofits and on the ACA shows in general, and in the atheist community in general, that's something that we can that's something very practical. Kelly Laughlin likes to say, what can we do? What can we do, right? Let's get up and do something. Well, that's something that we can do. We can normalize this idea that not believing in these things is okay. And now that doesn't mean that, our battle is over here, right? This battle for rational thinking isn't over, but it does tell us that what we're doing is not necessarily in vain. And I think that's something to smile about. And I think it's a glimmer of hope. And I take I don't know. It makes me feel warm to read things like that. What do you got for us next, Phoebe, here?
So, we're all atheists and skeptics. This poll asks, well, what do you believe in that's supernatural? So, what's the supernatural thing that you remember that you believed in that was, well, most far wacky out there? Helen.
I was a pagan, so I can list off a whole list of bullshit if you want me to. So I believed in magic. I believed in psychics. I worked in a psychic education center for a little bit. So, and talked to mediums and people that could see the future and all that type of woo-woo weird shit. So we don't have time for me to go into all the bullshit that I used to believe. That's a different story. I've talked about it on other ACA shows like Truth Wanted, so you can go hear me over there talk about it. But anyway, I am really glad that these surveys are being done. And I also want to point out something about education and income level. We are now in the age of the internet, and people have access to education and information that they didn't have access to before. And if you have a smartphone and you're connected online, you have the ability to look up information, to learn new things. There are plenty of websites that teach educational courses that you can sign up for very little money. And I am encouraged by this because it helps people that may not get that access to like a formal education where you're going to like, a college, or, you can get it, but the arbitrary standard that we have set in this country about like you need to have a 4-year degree and blah blah blah. Okay, I get that because there is some rigorous study that has to happen, but the more access people have to education, and if it's available at your fingertips, the more we're going to move into a society of people learning skeptical thinking, learn how actually the world is. And I think that's a very encouraging, and I worry, as the faultiness in this data is that if we're equating education and intelligence with income level, that's not a fair way to look at it, because you could be very well educated and make 30,000 a year. So I think that, or less. So I think that that's something that we need to have more nuance on, especially going forward when we do these sort of studies. And also to understand that just because someone says that they don't believe in religion, they might believe in some weird woo-woo stuff, and I think that if we push more of that skeptical inquiry, which what Scott was saying, and we're going to see people eventually get access to more information, and those of us that are are activists are pushing for that, and I think that's a really, really good thing to do. So anyway, Ben, do you have more to add to this conversation as a super, super smart person?
I did want to answer Phoebe's question. And we can think of all the atypical things that are supernatural that we believed in, but it's the things that are so common that I still find to be the most disturbing things that I believed in, such as blood sacrifice to cleanse us of sin. Like, that's something I believed in, and that's something that like most Christians would not bat an eye at because it's normal to us, but it's very weird. It's a very weird idea, and the fact that we've normalized that is pretty wild. So I'm gonna say, the majority of Christianity is just a lot, a lot of that kind of weird stuff. But I don't need to think far into paganism or other things like to find weird things that I believed in, because, oh man, like Christianity has a lot of that.
And shares a lot with paganism too.
It's all bullshit with different dressing, basically.
Oh, absolutely.
Well, my answer, I think, is much more boring. I don't remember ever believing anything supernatural. I grew up in a religious family, but I don't remember ever believing it. Although I may have. I just don't remember it. The only thing that I really remember believing was when I was a little kid. I couldn't have been more than like 6 or 7. I got one of those chain letters. I don't know. You kids out there, we used to get like paper letters in the mail, and it would show up at our house, and you could tear it open and read it. It was crazy. It was wacky stuff. But I got a chain letter, and it said, if you have to send this to 10 people within 3 days or whatever, and I missed the deadline, and I was legitimately scared. I couldn't sleep for like 2 or 3 days. It was, I thought some bad stuff was going to happen. And maybe that was my first step on my path to skepticism. Maybe I was like, what? I thought something was supposed to happen to me. Nothing happened. And I was okay. But I think that's maybe the closest I ever came to actually believing anything kind of wacky like that.
So you weren't one of those seed money people. You didn't seed your money.
From what I remember, there wasn't any money involved. It was just
so you weren't seeding your pocket money or your allowance away. Then, well, that's a relief. Yeah. But to answer my own question, I used to be a practicing Jew, and I used to believe that I could literally wash away my sins by going to a special bath and washing them away. Literally, they would all be washed away if I dunked my head in everything under the water. And you think of that now, and you just go, you're just a bit cleaner physically. You're not actually doing anything. It's just.
Did you pick up any sins from the person that was ahead of you?
No, I think that they magically dissolved, and then they were all gone.
Oh, I forgot about the magic dissolving. Okay, sorry, my fault.
You see, it's like Epsom salts.
It's sin infectious.
Right.
Epsom salts. But it is weird what we all actually think of and what we actually believe. But to see that the baby steps in the right direction are happening, but I hate to use my mother as an example, but she did hire a medium after my grandfather died, and that was out of step for my mother. And we have to be aware that people will sometimes drift into these things and sometimes drift out of these things. Just like you can drift out of here and drift back in here and watch more Non-Profits episodes.